Wonderful. Well, good afternoon, everyone. I figure we'll go ahead and jump in and get started here. My name is Alex Worth, and I'm the co-founder and CEO of Quorum. I'm really excited today to be joined by two of DoorDash's finest, Max Rettig, their senior counsel and head of public policy, and Toney Anaya, the head of government relations for DoorDash, to talk today about how DoorDash is engaging state and local officials during the coronavirus pandemic through their Project Dash campaign. Want to give everyone a brief overview of what we're going to be talking about today. So we're going to have the chance to hear a little bit from Max about the impact the coronavirus has had on DoorDash and the delivery industry. We'll then talk a little bit about how DoorDash has been tracking and responding to state and local coronavirus policies, stay-at-home orders, and what the response has been and the methods that they've been using to stay aware of those changes. And then we'll spend some time talking about the Project Dash campaign, where it came from, what has their outreach been to state and local lawmakers, how have they been doing that outreach and the response they've been getting, with the hopes being that it can inform all of you on this webinar as you think about your own engagement with state and local officials during these really unprecedented and challenging times. As always, we'll finish off with some Q&A for everyone on the webinar. If you drag your mouse down to the bottom of the screen, you'll see a little thing that says Q&A. You're welcome to submit questions at any time throughout the webinar through our presenters, and we'll do our best to get to all of them at the very end. But before we jump in, we just want to ask you all a very quick poll, and we want to learn a little bit more about how your organization has engaged state and local policymakers during the coronavirus outbreak. So curious if you've been sending emails from your team, if you've been launching grassroots advocacy campaigns to state and local officials, if you've been doing video meetings with legislators and their staff, all of the above or something completely else. So would love for you to take a quick moment here and just share with us a little bit about how you've been engaging with state and local officials. Wonderful. Well, we appreciate you taking the time to share that. I'm having a little trouble here seeing the results, but hopefully someone on my team will share them and we'll share them back with all of you so that we can get a sense of how the webinar has been impacting state and local officials. The results that I just heard back from our team, most folks are primarily focused on emailing out to state and local officials. So we haven't seen tons of video engagement or grassroots advocacy from the folks on the webinar, but we'll make sure to circulate more of that as we go. But would love to jump in here and talk about tracking and responding to state and local coronavirus policies. But I think it's important to set the stage. And so Max, would love to hear from you a little bit about DoorDash and the platform and how it's been impacted by the coronavirus pandemic.
Sure. Well, thanks, Alex. Thanks for having us. Excited to get to talk with all the folks tuning in today and who may watch this on video. So thanks very much for including us. We're a pretty young public policy team. There are just a few of us and we're really building from the ground up. So it's a great opportunity for us to connect with you and all the teams around the country listening in. So there's this adage in politics that you never waste a crisis. And in some respects, that's especially true of what we're seeing and especially true of our company in this moment. I think in a lot of ways, this really is our moment. We've always thought of ourselves as something much more than a way to get a burrito to your door. And this is really our opportunity to prove it, to live our values as a company and to show the world what our values are. And then in a political sense, we see it as an opportunity to try to reset the political landscape. For years now, we've been engaged in pretty tough public policy battles across different states, across different cities, across different issue areas, from worker classification to legislation regulating our fee structure. This is an opportunity for us to show the world that when we say that our mission is to empower local economies, we really mean it. and that we are here to help support local businesses that are being hit especially hard in this moment, and to help people who are coming to our platform for work. To the extent that folks are familiar with our platform, you're probably most familiar with it as the way that you get food delivered from your favorite restaurant. And if you take a step back and think about what that really means, it's money going into the hands of small businesses predominantly in the communities where you live. It's money going into the hands of people who are delivering the food, and it's money that's being generated for local jurisdictions and states in the form of sales tax. So we're kind of an economic hub, and we're proud of that, and try to help the outside world really see that and appreciate it. We recognized really that we had a responsibility and an opportunity to prove our worth to each of our core users. And so I thought I would walk through the programs that we've developed on each, the ways that we've used Quorum a little bit, and then I can leave it there, and Toney can talk in more detail about some of the ways in which Quorum has really given us the platform on which to send our message. So on the restaurant side of things, we've made huge investments to try to keep restaurants afloat. So the first was we used Quorum to track orders as they were coming down from mayors and from governors closing businesses and only allowing essential services to continue. So for restaurants, that meant no more diners in a lot of cities and states, but they could remain open for delivery. So we've made pretty significant investments as a business to try to drive more orders to these restaurants, to keep them open in the first instance, then to drive more orders to them. And we've also been actively monitoring and engaging on legislation at all levels, but in particular at the federal level. So the most recent stimulus package passed by Congress includes a lot of programs that businesses can take advantage of, and we're trying to help educate the businesses that are on our platform about ways in which they can get immediate support. So Quorum's been very helpful there. On the consumers,
Matt,
yeah.
Would just love to jump in here and ask a couple of questions on the restaurant front, because I think, many of us, I sit here in Washington, D.C., we've got a stay-at-home order. Curious if you could take us behind the scenes on what happens for an individual state. So you get an alert saying, D.C., Virginia, and Maryland have just put in place stay-at-home orders. Are your restaurants reaching out to you? Are you guys reaching out to the restaurants? What does that alert kind of set in motion on your end from a public policy and from an operations perspective?
Yeah, it's really both. So we make sure that we're routing the notices to the right folks internally in the company, usually a mix of public policy and legal, to make sure that we understand the nuances of the order. Are restaurants allowed to stay open? Under what circumstances? During what times of day? Are there restrictions around how deliveries need to be completed? For example, do deliveries have to be what's called contactless? So we really have to digest it and then get the information out to other stakeholders within the business and be prepared to answer questions from restaurants and from associations that represent restaurants. So it's really both. And then a little bit outside the realm of restaurants, we also have to make sure that the people doing deliveries out on the road have the documentation that they need in order to be able to prove that they are performing an essential service, so that if law enforcement stops a delivery person, they've got something in the app that says, in this jurisdiction, according to this executive order, delivering food from a restaurant is considered an essential service, or delivering groceries from a grocery store is considered an essential service. So we take that input that we get through Quorum, and then a lot has to happen for it to actually become operationalized within the context of our platform.
Fascinating. And give me a sense, what is the turnaround time on which you need to do all of this? An order comes out, are we talking 5 hours, 12 hours, 24 hours? What does it look like between when you all get an order and when many of these items go into operation?
It's pretty instantaneous. And it's instantaneous, and over the course of the past couple of weeks, it's been fast and furious. We've seen upwards of 40 plus states institute some form of restrictions, and we've tried to get that into the hands of our operators and into the hands of the people who are doing deliveries within a matter of an hour or two, because all of these things are happening in real time, and it's obviously a crisis scenario that requires everyone to move quickly.
Wow. And it speaks to the value of just staying on top of all of these changes as it's happening and close to real time. But really impressive that you guys are responding within an hour or 2 hours. Out of curiosity, anecdotally, what are you seeing the balance now between state versus city stay-at-home orders? Are you seeing a lot more state-based ones? Are you seeing cities that will add on to what a state is doing and maybe be more strict or restrictive? Or seeing cases like Texas where cities are leading the states?
Yeah, welcome Tony to jump in with any additional thoughts. I think it probably started at the local level. So we saw San Francisco, our hometown, really get out ahead of the rest of the country and issue one of the first very restrictive stay-at-home orders, and then California followed suit. I think what we're seeing, I think the trend that we're seeing is that states really are taking charge of this now, but we still have some cities and counties that are issuing restrictions that are more restrictive than what their states are doing at that level.
I think that's right, Max. And what we've had to really do is tailor our monitoring to really look for these blips coming up, because the wave did start when we saw these individual jurisdictions making these decisions. Then the states started taking action. And now we're watching individual counties or maybe cities responding to flare-ups and maybe getting more restrictive. The second component of the value that this type of alert gives us is the ability to proactively anticipate what jurisdictions might be coming next, and then to engage with the elected officials and the regulators who are making decisions. One of the most important things from our perspective is to ensure that our merchant partners, the restaurants, can stay open for delivery or open for takeout to the extent it's safe. And all the regulators have determined for now that delivery is safe if done within certain parameters. We know so many of these restaurants are under tremendous financial stress, and that delivery and takeout is really their financial lifeline. It's also very important to folks at home who are facing the restrictions that have come along with the orders. So that those two components that advanced intel give us, one is to make sure our business is responding. We're communicating with our partners. We've actually partnered with the National Restaurant Association in terms of sharing information internally and externally, all with that same goal of trying to support our merchant partners, providing an atmosphere that's safe for our dashers, our delivery partners, making sure that we know what restrictions or recommendations, frankly, are being made in terms of deliveries as well. And that's really an interesting piece of how I think we're going to be watching very carefully how regulators approach it. One final note is I came into this very naively, assuming that the management was done at a very high level in the federal government. And I think as everybody has learned, a lot of what comes out of the feds are these guidelines, and ultimately it's up to the states to implement. And having a tool like Quorum has allowed us to really drill in quickly into what's a constantly shifting environment.
So Tony, to just dive in on that a little bit more, I think the proactive piece is really interesting. So to understand, I assume you all are monitoring the conversations on social media. Are you hearing chatter from basically local officials that a stay-at-home order might be coming, and then you're using that to go engage with those local or state officials ahead of time?
We'll see that. And it's interesting, the Twitter accounts of the governors are particularly helpful, I think, because prior to or simultaneous with any press conference or announcement, most of the governors are posting on Twitter. And we'll see some interesting retweet activity coming from legislators. And then another dynamic, a little bit away from your question, but something that I find very heartening, is that you will see a lot of local legislators pointing to restaurants that are still open for delivery in their districts and trying to navigate their constituents to those restaurants, oftentimes referencing all of the delivery platforms as options. So yeah, the Twitter feeds in particular on the East Coast are very helpful, but all of the feeds have been fantastic.
Well, I think that speaks to something that we've honestly seen across the entire public affairs industry, which is just so much more of this conversation is happening online on social media. And it serves as a really wonderful early warning system, both in the most challenging of times like we're in today, but also in the best of times when these possibilities start to pop up. So I think really interesting to hear how you all have been responding and basically responding both proactively and reactively as cities and states have been issuing stay-at-home orders. But the other piece of this that I really want to talk about is the work that you've been doing to serve local communities with Project Dash. So maybe Max, we go over back to you. Would love if you could share with us a little bit more about what exactly is Project Dash, and then would love to hear about how you've been using that to engage with state and local lawmakers during these times.
Sure. So the core of our platform is getting goods moved around cities and suburbs and towns, last mile delivery. And you can apply that model to the food that you want to get from your restaurant, but you can equally apply that model to getting food to communities in need and other essentials to communities in need. So Project Dash is a project that we've had at DoorDash for about a year and a half, 2 years, kind of in normal times. And in normal times, what we do is we facilitate the delivery of excess food from restaurants and from corporate catering and get it safely to food banks where people in need can eat and nourish themselves. This is much more important than we ever thought it would be in this time of crisis. So we have effectively said that our platform is open to any mayor or governor or community group that needs it. And we've seen a tremendous outpouring of interest from elected officials, from nonprofits. So a couple of examples. Well, first, we put out the all call using the Quorum platform. So we wrote an open letter to mayors and governors in which we described what we were doing for our community, the availability of Project Dash to help get food and other necessities to students and seniors and other communities in need. And we blasted it out to thousands of elected officials and emergency management officials. We've gotten a lot of expressions of interest back, and we've also been reaching out through other channels as well to try to make sure that the right people know that our services are available. We've launched programs in New York City, getting school lunches to students who are at home and can't go pick up their school lunch. We've launched grocery delivery to seniors. We're doing programs in Portland and San Jose, New Orleans, really all of Chicago, all around the country. Where if folks have ideas for ways that we can do even more, we're ready to do it. The capacity is almost limitless, and we want to do as much as we can in this time of need.
So Max, just to make sure that everybody on the webinar understands, essentially, as I understand it myself, you all are offering your delivery service at cost for state and local governments who have urgent supplies that they need to get out to people that are now dispersed across. So rather than tons of people coming to a food bank, a state and local government could go and have DoorDash delivery drivers, dashers as you call them, deliver out the materials of that food bank to a list of 100, 1,000 seniors in their community. Is that correct?
That's exactly right.
And then in terms of the response that you've been getting, obviously you sent it out by email, sent it out to thousands of mayors and state and local lawmakers. What does that response look like, and how have you been handling all the incoming?
I can address that, Max.
Great, please do.
We configured the platform with your staff's excellent help, and if we have a chance, I'll get back to how we pulled the platform on board in record time, but which is an interesting story in and of itself. But we configured, working with your team, the platform to target key elected officials, of course, as Max mentioned, the governors, the mayors, as well as some legislative staff, and then key executive agencies. And at the time, we were frankly guessing, but we wanted to broadcast as widely as possible. Emergency management officials, and really try to push as much information and intel out there as possible. we sent those emails out, and we had a surprisingly high open rate. I think our open rates are close to 40%. And we saw feedback in a number of ways. There was initially a handful of direct requests for assistance, which we in turn passed on to our teams. There was a lot of thank you and then pushing us to the right agency. So if it went to the governor's chief of staff, the opportunity was then sent to maybe somebody at Department of Health and Human Services or Department of Aging, or out to the emergency management officials. That in and of itself, I think when we look back, the goodwill that just that outreach has garnered, you know, our GR team is relatively young, and the ability to make those first intros to a gubernatorial chief of staff under these circumstances is a good one. So, you know, it's, you know, we these type of opportunities to have that type of engagement just don't come around very often. So the requests would get forwarded on, and it's really kind of been organic since then. So it's growing on its own. They're getting kicked around. We're kind of looking at what does wave 2 look like in terms of our communications. We can talk about that as well. But you know, some of the lessons learned from that first round: does it need to be so broad? Keeping the communication simple. We did a lot of work with your team on making the steps in which to access the access to Project Dash as straightforward as possible. But from a technology standpoint, the process was seamless, and there was no way we could have done that individually. It just wouldn't have been effective.
So Toney, would you share with folks, who did you decide on targeting, and how many hundreds or thousands of people do you think the message ended up going out to, and who were those people?
It went out to all 50 governors. We targeted their chiefs of staff, and you know, in cases where we knew some of their staff, we included them, some of their senior staff. We also looked at the agencies that we thought might be interested or have impact, the ones I mentioned previously. We also drilled down a little bit into legislative leadership. And in hindsight, I think it could have gone to every legislator, but that seemed like a little bit too saturated. But we did focus on legislative leaders and in a handful of key committees. And at the municipal level, we were trying to make a decision, and we kind of came up with a 30,000 plus population threshold. And we were able to determine through an existing relationship we have with NCSL and others, a list that we were able to upload into the platform for our mayors. So of those, I think a total 2,500, approximately 2,500 emails went out in the span of about an hour. And we're, you know, again, we're following those up. One of the nice aspects of this approach has been our ability to see, okay, who hasn't opened. And last week we sent out another batch to just those who hadn't opened, and we've gotten a good response from that. One lesson, we were rushed to get it out, but as a consequence, we weren't really thinking about the day. We sent them out on a Friday afternoon, which despite the crisis, we weren't really thinking of the days, but we probably could have waited till this Saturday morning or even Monday. But it hit, you know, thousands of people very quickly, and the open rate and response rate has been very positive.
So I think it's really impressive that you saw a 40% open rate. You know, we usually will say folks should look for around 20. And I think when you look at just the general industry averages around marketing and communications emails, it's closer to 10%. So really wonderful job that your team has done in terms of providing that useful content and, you know, providing that in a way that state and local lawmakers find really helpful. I also think it's interesting the impact that you've seen of individuals forwarding it along to the right person. And so, you know, nothing's more powerful than when the intro comes from the governor's chief of staff or the Senate majority leader who knows who the person is in the state, and using that both as a way to quickly get you to the right person, but also as a way to generate some goodwill. And I know, Max, when we were doing our prep call for this, you talked about really this coronavirus as a way to improve the reputation of the industry. And would love to hear a little bit more kind of on your thoughts of how you've been using the public policy efforts, and particularly the Project Dash campaign around improving the reputation and positioning DoorDash as a really strong and leading company.
Yeah, it really starts with the fundamentals for us. That we frequently say that our platform only works if it works for all of our users. So that means consumers, that means restaurant owners, that means Dashers, and then the community at large. So we've tried to develop a policy position and corporate policies that are intended to support all sides of our marketplace. And I think so doing that work internally to make sure that the business understands what elected officials and policymakers are saying, where they're really going to be looking to us to show leadership, taking that internally, building it into changes to the way that our corporation is functioning. So an example would be we made a huge investment for the restaurants on our platform. We have a fee structure. We reduced our fees. We invested a lot of marketing dollars, all to try to drive revenue to these restaurants that were really starved for customers, and then being able to communicate that out so that elected officials know what we're doing on behalf of the restaurant community in their city or town. And then the second piece, I think, is highlighting what we're doing through Project Dash, and we can do that directly by working with governments and hopefully convincing elected officials to speak about our efforts, our partnerships publicly. But it also speaks to the importance of a nexus between the work that a public policy team is doing and the public affairs function. So we've been working really hard to make sure that these good news stories are making their way into local press and national press to the extent that opportunities are there. I think if elected officials are reading about it in the newspaper, that's going to make an impact, and it's going to make it that much easier for us to have the conversation when some of these tough issues come back around, when the legislatures are back in session and have a little bit more time and attention to devote to things other than the immediate crisis.
So Max, will you say a little more about how you've been able to get some of these stories in the press? So obviously your team sets up a wonderful relationship with either a state or a municipality. Are you then passing that off to the communications team? Are you all pitching it? What does that look like?
Yeah, so just to the extent that it's of interest to the folks tuning in, the way that we've structured our team is the social impact, public policy, and communications functions are all integrated together. And that's probably a little bit, it's similar, I'm sure, to the way that some other companies structure their shops. But even in our recent history, the policy team was part of legal. But I think for this particular moment, it's been really helpful for us to have social impact policy and communications as one integrated function, because we really all have to be working very closely together to make sure that we're doing the things that we can then communicate out publicly so that elected officials know and understand what we're doing for the community. So we're partnering very closely with our public relations team, our communications team, to go and pitch stories. And community affairs is another important element of this. We've cultivated relationships with the Dashers who work on our platform across the country over the course of the past many months. And that's enabled us to go to different media outlets and say, hey, here's a Dasher that you can talk to who can tell you about his or her personal experience and how he or she is finding it to be out there working right now. And we've had some really compelling stories about how Dashers feel yes, there are risks, but to be out in the community delivering food to people who really need it, who need to be sheltering in place because of the risks, that's been really, really powerful.
Wow. And then I assume, lots of these press articles are coming out. How are you all keeping track of them or preparing to use them, in the future?
Toney, go ahead.
That is a fantastic question, and I think our silence maybe speaks volumes, right? Here's where I think we're sitting. This came so rapidly, and as we talk about the policy, of course, it's very serious. It's hitting all of our communities, and we're very concerned what the long-term economic impact is going to be to one of the most valuable assets when it comes to the business function, and that is the local restaurant. So understanding how we ride this out as a business, how we're serving our communities, and then what the landscape looks like afterwards, we really have to be mindful of our approach to communications, our approach to public policy. if we do this right, we're building strong narratives, we're supporting our community, we're meeting needs that mayors and elected officials are identifying, we're capturing those moments, and then we're communicating them back out at the right time. And it really does come down to kind of the storytelling part and the narrative. And as we're looking internally, and as we're trying to put 25 hours into a 24-hour day, that is really an opportunity that we have to shape. And I think it's something that if we figure out right, then we'll be able to really pull from this experience, many, many good things. At the end of the day, there's so many controversial public policy issues that we deal with, but every one of those gets humanized in something like this. And, without going into the issue itself, worker classification is very hot right now. And, our model uses independent contractors. And if you look at at what's happening with a lot of the independent contractors on our platform, is they're the ones who are actually out there working and earning money. I was talking to one of my dashers who delivered to me a couple of days ago, and he had just been laid off from a tech company, and he was using the platform to help kind of make ends meet. I think those are powerful narratives that really explain the value of the flexibility that this type of work gives the employee, the individual. And so I think that's another area of the narrative storytelling that we have an opportunity to really capture.
Mm-hmm. I'll jump in here and just share two best practices that we've heard from other organizations. One came yesterday as part of this webinar series with the American Hotel and Lodging Association, and they've been putting together state-by-state PDFs and fact sheets about how the industry has been impacted in their case, the hotel industry. But the best practice for anyone on this call would be doing the same for your industry or your company and sharing those key press stories at the bottom, along with the results that have happened of whether in DoorDash's case, how many individual meals delivered, the partnerships that have happened along the way, as well as some of the response and stories that they've been hearing from their individual dashers. But that was one, there was a lot of questions in Q&A that came from. And you would encourage you to go to our COVID-19 Resource Center, where you can see that entire conversation, and AHLA dive in a bit more on what exactly they did. The other best practice that I would just share is that as these articles come out, is targeting and sending them out to state and local lawmakers. So I think Max is spot on when he says we want the state and local lawmakers to read about it in the newspaper. And I can tell you that many of them spend a lot of time reading the newspaper, but just to make sure that it gets far and wide, I'm originally from Santa Fe, New Mexico. If you got it in the Santa Fe New Mexican, take that New Mexican article and email it out to lawmakers across the entire state, because that local connection people will still get, and they'll take the opportunity and want to go and read it. And you can take that press and have it extend even farther. So I think really wonderful to hear the results that the DoorDash team has been able to pull in all together from having that community, press, and government affairs team in the same place. I would love to talk a little bit more about what is next. So obviously, you all have run a very successful early engagement effort, but we are looking at what may be months more at home. How do you think about continuing to engage with state and local lawmakers as this pandemic continues?
We touched a little bit on it earlier, Alex, and that is, as the narratives continue to develop around Project Dash, and it expands into more and more communities, we're learning, and we're learning how to communicate better about it, but then also we're learning how to better administer the program. So, currently to date, we've delivered north of 40,000 deliveries, 75,000 plus individual meals. I think that's going to keep growing at a rapid rate. So as we plunge into more and more communities, I think, is it going to be a communication conversation with the local elected officials? How do we pull them into announcements that are made? How do we use their communications platforms to spread the opportunities into the community, the availability of the resource? And then there's interesting components that are coming that we had no way to anticipate. I've had to become somewhat knowledgeable on the SNAP program and how the EBT process is administered in states. We've received contacts from departments of Health and Human Services that are trying to figure out how to get SNAP recipients their grocery benefits, but there's certain quirks within federal law that have, that don't allow for delivery. So what are the ways that we can partner, given our resources in DC to try to support changes to federal regs to allow delivery during this time. So I don't know what's going to happen next time I check my email, and it keeps taking turns in various directions that we hadn't anticipated. But I do know that we're going to continue to see the growth, and we do need to continue to be proactive. As Max mentioned, the limits, there really are very few limits on the platform because it scales up according to the need. And there's a lot of Dashers who are really anxious to hop on the platform. So, I really want us to continue to push this out there and get continued interest.
That's very helpful. Well, I want to open it up here for Q&A in just a minute. So folks on the webinar, if you have questions, again, please pull your mouse down to the bottom. There's a little chat bot that says Q&A, or a little 2 individual thought bubbles. So please click on that and submit your questions in for both Toney and Max. And as people do that, Toney and Max, final question that I have for both of you is that as you look back on what you've done so far, anything that you would do different, or advice that you have to other people that are looking to engage with state and local lawmakers during this pandemic?
I have one thought, and then Max, I'll toss it over to you. I wish that we had been faster and more aggressive in the external communications. That said, I've been blown away with how fast we've been able to do this. So fortunately, the team within DoorDash is very, very fast to react. I've worked with other companies that the systems are a lot slower. So my one recommendation would be anticipate in a crisis environment that you need to move fast, and whether it's legal approvals, running it by comms, or in certain circumstances, getting senior management, senior leadership approvals, be ready to move very, very fast, and obviously take care of your ethics and your compliance issues, but don't be shy to over communicate in an environment where you think you might be able to be of service to the community.
Yeah, and I think I share Tony's overall sense that we've managed to do pretty well in a tough environment. I think one of the challenges that you always face in a crisis is striking the right balance between moving quickly and pausing to think strategically. And I think that we've done that to a degree, but I think that there are probably opportunities to think even bigger and think about how you can achieve scale quickly, even as you are trying to seize every opportunity that comes your way.
Well, as I mentioned, we want to transition over to Q&A. So again, feel free to submit your question via the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. The first one that has come up is, what has the industry collaboration, dining delivery platforms looked like as you all navigate these patchwork of regulations? And I would even expand that further to during this pandemic. What has that looked like? Have you all been coordinating a response? And take us behind the scenes on that.
Sure. So I think starting with, on general policy issues that affect the industry, we work very closely together. We have regular channels of communication. In California, a number of the companies are part of a coalition that is running a ballot initiative campaign. And we're pretty closely aligned. There are certainly places where we don't always see eye to eye, where we have different approaches, et cetera. But on the whole, it's a pretty collaborative relationship within the sector at large. In terms of response to coronavirus in particular, probably a little bit less coordination, but I think as it's turned out, every company in this space has tried to do right by their communities. We've each done it in a different way, but I think by and large, the sector is really coming together to support restaurants, support workers, support communities. We think we've done a particularly good job at DoorDash, but I think that the sector is really coming together.
That's great. Next question that we had is, while DoorDash will scale up to meet the demand, what do you see as too much? What asks is DoorDash receiving that you've had to say no to?
I think one of the challenges that we have in the domain of Project Dash is our capacity to fulfill deliveries is virtually unlimited. Our capacity and kind of government capacity nonprofit capacity to fund deliveries is not unlimited. So the person making the delivery has to get paid, and has to get paid an amount that's fair to do the work. And that's especially true now when people are taking on some risks in going out and making deliveries. So we can't make deliveries free to all users. And as Tony alluded earlier, there are some restrictions around the way that federal funding can be used. So we're trying to get creative and think through different funding sources so that we can reach national scale. We're partnering on the national level with United Way. And what we would like to be able to do is, deliveries to anybody in need in any of the communities that United Way serves, but we've got to find a way to make that happen.
Not a question just came in, but one of our viewers just wanted to say thank you for Project Dash. I enjoy your meal deliveries, but had no idea you were there for seniors and school children. So a fun benefit of these webinars is learning a little bit more about industries and companies that we all interact with on a daily basis. The next question that we had was, some companies are receiving backlash from employees and contractors during the COVID crisis. What are you doing to prevent this from happening with the Dashers, especially for Project Dash?
Yeah, I'll start with the specific and I'll go to the general. So we try to make sure that that Dashers as a whole know the sorts of things that we're doing for the community. It's easy to just assume that Dashers don't care about that sort of thing, but as it turns out, Dashers are people living in their communities. They are teachers, they're firefighters, they're parents, and they want to know that the company that they're affiliated with is making investments in their communities. So I think this is a place where we can improve, making sure that Dashers understand that we're doing Project Dash and that we've got other kinds of programs that are really focused on building community is part of it. And then, in terms of making sure that Dashers feel protected when they're on the road and feel like they're being taken care of if they get sick, we've made some pretty big investments there. Hand sanitizer, wipes, and gloves for Dashers. We're distributing tons and tons of personal protective equipment. We have created a financial assistance program if Dashers get sick with coronavirus. And we're looking at different ways that we can provide yet more support to the Dasher community. So not to say that we're not going to get incoming from elected officials. There'll probably be some stories published today about calls from different elected officials for ways that we should be doing things differently. But we're really keenly focused on this and are trying to make some pretty big investments to make sure that the community of Dashers feels really well supported.
Wonderful. Next question kind of continues on that, but from a little bit of a macro scale. It says, thank you for your presentation. You mentioned the opportunity for a positive narrative on the value of having flexible work opportunities, layoffs having gig opportunities to supplement income. Do you anticipate any challenges for independent contractors post-COVID-19? And what are your thoughts on early calls for universal basic income?
It's a big question. I don't profess to have any idea. I imagine that what we're going through now will probably lend more voice to folks who are calling for UBI. I don't know, my very uneducated view is that we probably won't see that come to fruition, just thinking about the way that the political dynamics are likely to shape up at the federal level. But who knows? Crazy things happen in politics. And then what are the challenges for independent contractors? Our platform has been operating largely in an environment where employment is pretty strong. And the way that people use our platform is a few hours a week to supplement their income. People may have different sorts of needs in an economy that looks different, but I think it's a little bit too soon to tell. I think if I had a guess, I would guess that most people are still going to be using the platform to supplement whatever it is they're doing with most of their time, but only time will tell.
Next question comes, have you seen issues where there are regulatory issues for a restaurant who's struggling and retooling to allow for not only pickup of food, but also selling grocery items to help their local community?
I can offer an anecdote, which is that A colleague of ours sent around a screenshot of an order that they were placing last night on DoorDash, where the restaurant was including a free roll of toilet paper with your pasta dish of choice. So that's, I think that I've heard about, liquor stores starting to run CSAs out of their space. I don't know that we've seen the trend that the questionnaire described about large scale, but it'd be interesting to learn more about it. So if folks hear about it, please pass it along. We're happy to see if there are ways that we can help.
Wonderful. And the last questions that we've got, so if you've got one that you're waiting on, please submit it, but is a little more on the technical level. And that is, what about the emails? Our state legislators hate emails, and especially form emails. So maybe this one's for Toney a little bit on what has the response been that you've been getting, and have you gotten any negative responses, and do you see that coming from one particular state or another?
Yeah, no negative responses yet. The emails that went out to the governors and the mayors were almost all opened or responded to. I mean, not all, close to 40%. We didn't get any negative feedback in that regard. And, we've had a lot of positive feedback. Now, one of the aspects of this, I don't even want to call it bulk email, but the ability to customize the email that the platform gives us, I think makes the email itself much more friendly. So it's coming from my email address. We're able to customize the field so it's going to the individual legislator. You can, customize and include the mention of the state or the city in the text. So I think that is provided for a much more friendly email. Everybody gets too much email these days. And I think, in general advocacy, maybe the response wouldn't be as positive. But in this context, clearly people want information, and we're trying to provide that. But I no negative stories to share so far. It's all been either neutral or tremendous upside.
Well, I think that's a great way to end on it, and really speaks to the work that DoorDash has done from the perspective of being able to take and offer something to help out all of our communities, and particularly to help out elected officials and their staff, and the positive response that they've gotten of being able to personalize that, set it out in a really concise form, and get it out to thousands of people across the country. So a big thank you to both Toney and Max for joining us today and sharing a little bit more about what they've done. A brief reminder that we'll be back next week on Tuesday and Wednesday at 3 p.m. We're going to be talking about managing public affairs teams while remote, and also about lobbying from home, how to adjust your congressional outreach strategy during social distancing. So it'll be the same webinar link. We'd invite you to come back and learn from other public affairs professionals as they're working to tackle some of these challenges that the entire industry is facing. And finally, if you'd like a recording of this webinar, we'd ask that you fill out just a quick survey and let us know your thoughts on how it went today, as we work to continue to provide the most helpful materials for you as well. And then, of course, we'll follow up to anybody who fills out that survey with the recording of the webinar. So with that, we'll conclude for today. But thank you all so much for joining us. And again, a big thank you to Toney, Max, and the entire DoorDash team for everything that they're doing.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you very much.